This is a little project that's kind of grown a few legs, and we brought it already to a little festival called Féile Solas, and we're bringing it now to Electric Picnic at the end of August. So I'd like maybe as a little kind of settler to start off with a little parable. And then we'll go into just a little bit about pleasure activism, but in particular where it intersects, I guess, with development education and global citizenship education and its relevance to the work that we're all doing. In our discussion, I would like you to think as well. I'd like it to be as active as possible with questions, but I also have a few discussion prompts that maybe we'll have a little chat about how we can really kind of fit this into our work, and also where it interacts with other visions for the future as well. So just to start off, it's a very summer story, and it's called, you may or may not know this, and it's called The Parable of Mexican Fisherman. If you'd like to kind of close your eyes and have a listen, that would be lovely, but just to relax us into what we're going to be speaking about today. There's several versions of this story, but I'll give it in its original. So, an American investment banker was at a pier of a small coastal Mexican village when a small boat with just one fisherman docked. Inside the small boat were several large yellowfin tuna. The American complimented the Mexican on the quality of his fish and asked how long it took to catch them. The Mexican replied, "Only a little while." The American then asked, why didn't he stay out longer and catch more fish? And the Mexican said he had enough to support his family's immediate needs. And the American then asked, "But what do you do with the rest of your time?" And the Mexican fisherman said, "Well, I sleep late, I fish a little, I play with my children, I take siestas with my wife Maria, and I stroll into the village each evening where I sip wine and I play guitar with my amigos. I have a full and busy life." The American scoffed. "I have an MBA from Harvard and I can help you. You should spend more time fishing and with the proceeds buy a bigger boat. With the proceeds from the bigger boat, you could buy several boats and eventually you would have a fleet of fishing boats. Instead of selling your catch to the middleman, you could sell directly to the processor. Eventually, opening up your own cannery, you could control a product processing and distribution," he said. "Of course, you would need to leave this small coastal fishing village and move to Mexico City, then Los Angeles, and eventually to New York City, where you'll run an expanding enterprise." And the Mexican fisherman asked, "But how long will this all take?" To which the American replied, "Oh, 15 to 20 years or so." "But what then?" asked the Mexican. The American laughed and said, "That's the best part. When the time was right, you would announce an IPO and sell your company stock to the public and become very rich. You would have millions. Millions, then what?" And the American said, "Then you could retire, move to a small coastal fishing village where you could sleep all day, fish a little, play with your kids, take siestas with your wife, and stroll to the village in the evenings where you could sip wine and play guitar with your amigos." So I guess we all know the story, and it didn't mean to stereotype people, and I should have given that disclaimer. There's also a European version of this story. And it gives us a little kind of entry into what we're talking about with pleasure activism. So this was, as I said, a project that we started. With creativity in change. And there was so a group of us decided as our awareness raising project that we were doing on the streets of Cork City, based on a few podcasts that we'd all listened to, like The Politics of Pleasure, like Women Have Better Sex Under Socialism, by Kirsten Godsey. So a couple of kind of theorists, and in particular, Pleasure Activism by Adrienne Maree Brown. It was a wonderful feminist, and she's written thousands of books. So we decided, let's bring this to Cork City. Before we go into all of that kind of thing, just to, I suppose, get where you're going. So this is us on our Cork City, where we did a number of activities. And one of the activities that we did was ask people a couple of questions. We made it very, very playful, where they had to put their hands in paint and answer yes or no using their handprints on paint. We also invited them to um, uh, share with us what brings them the most joy as well. And as part of this, as a preamble, we did a survey of far and wide on what brings people joy. And some of the main kind of outcomes were actually the things that bring us joy and pleasure are free. They're more to do with family, they're more to do with relationships and getting together with their friends, etc. And they weren't necessarily things that had a cost. So that was kind of one of the, I suppose, key points that we really, really brought to the surface with our pleasure activism and as part of the theory of pleasure activism. So I'm going to get you to do a little exercise now. And does everybody know in the reactions page, just if you have it on the bottom of your screen there, you'll see a little button called reactions. And in there, you'll see the icons there. There's a tick mark and then there's also an X. And I want you in a quick fire buzzer round to answer the following questions. I'll read them out, and as I read them, if you could tick yes or no. Do you think the things that bring you pleasure cost money? So, yes or no. Do you think society values careers over pleasure? Do you think you got enough education about healthy relationships and sexual pleasure? Do you think pleasure is a privilege? Have you taken time for your pleasure in the last 3 days? Do you think time is a barrier to experiencing pleasure? Do you or have you felt guilty about taking a rest? And do you think everyone in the world has the ability to experience pleasure? And do you think all genders have equal access to pleasure? So these are a few things you might think about. So obviously, when we were discussing these questions on the street, we kind of did a little chat. I guess some of the quotes from particularly Adrienne Maree Brown, which might be helpful for you to understand pleasure activism, are what our bodies and our human systems are structured for: our aliveness, gratitude, joy, and celebration. So this is the whole idea that when we know it so well in development education and global citizenship education, that we know that community and collective action is where it works. It's also better for people, and our human connections are much better for people. And without that, it's very, very difficult for us to do development education. Joy isn't just personal, it is communal. Community is where we celebrate life together, embracing our shared humanity and the beauty of the earth. It reminds us that relationships, not individualism, sustain us. So again, it's giving us a sense of our own kind of solidarity with other people as well. We see things as a whole, as opposed to as the individual. When we prioritize mine over ours, we weaken the very systems that sustain us. But when we embrace connection, we thrive together. So again, on that kind of systems thinking that if we are working in the communal space and if we are working towards things together as a community, they're not only more fun, but they are they're breaking down those very systems that we know are not working for us and for everybody around us. So let's keep I suppose, an eye and maybe a little bit of an explanation. And as I said, Alicia and Shauna, do jump in as well. If there's a few extra things that you may think that we need to say as well around this project. So again, our kind of first inspiration. So if anybody doesn't know it, I don't know, it's a very much a go-to for me anyway, is Upstream podcast, run by Della Duncan, and Robert, what's his name? But so it's really, really good. And they bring a lot of interviews and a lot of the way really, really, I suppose, progressive thinking again, thinking of upstream, it's where you go to the root causes and you always go upstream to see who's like, who's causing the damage, I guess. So with this particular episode, this was one of the sketch notes that we did. It was talking about, I suppose, how our needs are collective, abundant, and can bring us happiness. Whereas if our wants are based on the individual, we've created this scarcity around them, and they're based on desires alone. Um, I guess if we look at, the things that bring us pleasure, and that are cheap and that are free are usually the things within community that are based on sustainability and they're based on human flourishing. Whereas if we look at, I suppose, almost the hijacking of our own of pleasure and our hijacking of enjoyment, which is based around our kind of capitalist systems. Um, we are, I suppose, under consumerism, we're taught to desire things, but we're also, um, I suppose, brainwashed into thinking that things that bring us pleasure have to have a cost to them. And it also gives us the idea that we have to earn more and more and more and work more and more and more in order to access this pleasure. So this gives us a sense that, like, not everybody can. It makes, it impossible for people to think that they can access pleasure, or enjoyment without that money. As we all know, this system of growth and continued consumerism is all based around exploitation and extraction, which doesn't give access to all to have a pleasurable life. It's also competitive and it's harmful. So our access then is based on that competitiveness. So part of, I suppose, pleasure activism is also kind of an area around critical hedonism, which would say that, like, pleasure is collective action. And that, I suppose, we are in a frame. So there's another podcast around this. So both the people that were interviewed on the politics of pleasure are part of a movement called critical hedonism. So one kind of example that stands out under that is, say, like, we have an apartment. We're kind of then said, but then what next? We have to buy a house. We have to, you always, it's like we're brainwashed into wanting more and more and more and needing to buy more and more. And as we know, for whatever area we're in, whether we're more kind of environmental education or whether we're more human rights education or we're more like, the way looking at inequalities, all of that production, all of that consumption has led to where we are and the multi-crisis that we have today. There's an encouragement to look for that kind of third space in society that is not neither work or, like, consumer driven, and that it's a space where a community can come together. So I suppose this is just to show you what the world where people are deprived of pleasure, and that's whether it's in, like, the way that's worldwide. So looking at, I suppose if you look at from a purely economic point of view, um, economics has got it to a place where pleasure is seen as scarce. So we must work, serve, and consume the system in order for our desires to be met. Our desires, our pleasures, are must be of an economic interest rather than a collective or a pro-social one. It's like chasing the dragon. We're, like, the way we're, I suppose, programmed to want more and more and more in society. And again, we all know where that leads. It's like it's destructive and it's unsustainable. So pleasure activism is really about, like, making sure that that we are experiencing pleasure, but but not at the cost of the rest of the world, not at the cost of inequality, not at the cost of sustainability. So they're just a couple of sketch notes. All of this is being shared, by the way. So we're sharing, I guess, like the presentations and some of the articles. If you want to know more, we also have a playlist as well that you can add to, which has all the podcasts on it. So you can have a look at that. As part of our pleasure activism project, we made a little zine. So these are the kind of things that were in the zine. So we related to, say, examples of countries that would put well-being at the very, very center of their society. So examples like Costa Rica, where sustainability is very much at the center of what they do, and Bhutan, where happiness is at the very, very center of what they do. Having greater public services, having provision of, like, the way, you know, good healthcare means that people have more time for, to spend time with their families, to have leisure time as well. So that was kind of the argument. So I guess if we're looking at all of these, we've all looked at different kind of models of a vision of the future, say, the happiness index, the well-being economy, degrowth, for example. They all have this commonality around that we do need to focus our measure of success in every country on something different. We cannot continue with the growth imperative. So that's, I suppose, it's part of that movement towards, like, the way we cannot, like, the way at the very, very crux of it and the very, very root causes is our economic system and how it's not really, really working for all of us. So I guess if we were to summarize, our key points would be, like, pleasure is free and it should be free. Pleasure activism is about community. It is about our access to pleasure at the moment is unequal. And also, like, that where we have the most, I suppose, fun in giving to each other and sharing with each other. So a couple of questions that we asked kind of under that, and that we would ask at like, the way our interactions are the following. I'll fly through this because I notice I am out of time a little bit. Okay, so important part. Why is this important to global citizenship education? So traditional activism, I guess, can often be framed as demanding, draining experience, leading to burnout and decreased engagement. So I guess, like, we've all worked so hard to maybe change systems and everything like this. But it's really, I suppose, it's good to kind of keep ourselves, like, and activists kind of alive, really, by making sure that like, we're experiencing that it's fun as well. So we all know, like, the way that can be a big debate on whether, like, the way it should be fun or not. We're talking about very complex projects. I guess the idea of radical hope as well. By focusing on positive emotions, activists can create a more optimistic and empowering vision for the future as well. Using art, music, and other creative expressions to raise awareness about social justice issues can make activism more engaging and accessible. And building strong communities through shared activities can create a sense of belonging and support, and making activism more pleasurable. And pleasure activism recognizes that pleasure is not separate from politics, but rather an integral part of it. And by incorporating pleasure and joy into activism, individuals are more likely to remain engaged and in the long term, and it can attract also and help to attract new members as well. So we've huge connections. And I guess just a quick graph that I put together just so you can see, because you will all be familiar with, like, concepts like degrowth and the Wellbeing Economy Alliance as well. So they all agree on, like, challenging that dominant growth paradigm from different angles. All concepts challenge the status quo and advocate for a more equitable and fulfilling world and a more sustainable world, and all challenge that dominant narrative that equates productivity and sacrifice with social progress. Um, so it just gives you an idea on how all of these things relate. I guess, like, the way in conclusion, I would say that, for development education and for global citizenship education, we need obviously radical hope. And I think pleasure activism has a lot to lend to that. So just leaving you with a couple of quotes, and I guess when the inspiration for Adrienne Maree Brown's book did come, somewhat from Audre Lorde, who said, caring for ourselves in the midst of political turmoil is not self-indulgence, it's self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare itself. We won't have the energy to push for change if all you do is work and worry. So it's kind of like looking at that kind of like it's for us as activists, but always also looking further. So there's a lot more obviously to this. So there's but I suppose like a few kind of questions and discussion points that we might look at now would be, and I'll put this back up on the screen, is how would we bring this into our work? Do you agree with pleasure activism? How can we bring about a sense of community and solidarity that is both local and global? And how can we create that kind of third space in order for us to change the world and act in solidarity? So just a couple of, I suppose, things if you're interested in looking a little bit further. As I said, if you want to scan the QR code, you can add different things or add songs that bring you pleasure or joy, or maybe some podcasts. So all the podcasts that I've mentioned are there. As I said, Upstream has a couple of podcasts that are related to this, including Jason Hickel's, having a better life. So a lot of the work kind of relates to that, like, the way, because degrowth and well-being economy would both advocate for things like, a more kind of a better work-life balance, and therefore, leading to sustainability, for example. The pleasure activism book itself, looking at critical hedonism as well as part of that movement, and certainly the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, which is very, very much aligned to what we're talking about here. And the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, an Irish faction as well, and they've just written a really, really interesting paper around creativity and how that can help for a Wellbeing Economy Alliance. So that is it. I'm going to go back just to maybe to just those couple of questions, but really I would like to invite questions, and I would particularly like to maybe invite Alicia and Shauna as well, maybe to put in a couple extra points that I may have forgotten. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Lizzie. If it's okay, I'll hop in and add
Yeah.
on a bit. So maybe if it's helpful just to contextualize a little bit, I know Lizzie mentioned Audre Lorde, but sometimes we were very mindful when we were doing this project originally in Cork that we didn't want it to come across as if we were trying to say to ignore all the social issues going on and just like have a great time and throw around paint. So like those questions that we asked, like what brings you joy? What prevents you from experiencing joy, and what do you think is preventing others from experiencing joy? The range of conversations like could really be geared by like led by the person you were speaking to. It could start from something simple like them saying they really enjoy going for drinks with their friends, then being like, oh, like the fact that I have to care for my child stops me from being able to go out as much and experience the pleasurable experience I want to experience. And then by the end of it, we could be having really in-depth conversations about war and genocide. So there's really a range of how you can go about this. And with Audre Lorde, she looked at it as in she grew up during the civil rights movement in America, so saw it really as integral to politics to be able to have joy and like self-preservation, because as a black woman, when she was facing a lot of oppression and witnessing a lot of her family and friends facing oppression, she really saw it as integral to be able to sustain the joy and not let that be the last thing that people take away. And that's something we hear echoed in a lot of social justice movements, and we hear it coming out of Palestine as well. It's like, don't let the joy be taken out from you as well as an activist advocating for other people. So I think that's really helpful to contextualize it. And I just want to share a quote from Audre Lorde. Um, in touch with the erotic, which is what Audre Lorde would have referred to her version of pleasure activism as, I become less willing to accept powerlessness or those other supplied states of being which are not native to me, such as resignation, despair, self-effacement, depression, and self-denial. So I feel like if we look at it from that perspective, we can really have a critical lens of looking at access, who gets to access pleasure and what are the barriers, but also while still fulfilling ourselves to keep going.